Last year for April Fool's Day, I put out some top quality content in the form of my first tier list on the channel. Apparently, people didn't care so much for Payday facial hair, so this year it's only right that I'm the one who's made a fool of. I propose a challenge. The objective? Simply to clear 3 heists consecutively on the Death Wish difficulty. But that sounds pretty easy, so to make it fair punishment, I'm throwing in a few curveballs. Essentially, everything in today's video is going to be randomized, starting from the heist I actually have to play, the build I'm forced to use, even down to the weapons and their attachments I go in with. Everything is completely random, even the heisters we choose. To make things even harder, we're going to also be running with random perk decks and one randomly selected mutator, which will make things truly wacky. Once again, all I need to do to succeed in this challenge is to complete 3 heists in a row without failing. But with all the variables we're up against, I'm going to need some serious luck to ever free myself from this April Fool's nightmare. Just a quick note before we get into attempt number 1, all the mods used to get this randomized effect will be linked down in the description. For the things that can't be randomized in games, such as the mutator and perk deck, I've simply used Google's random number generator feature to pick the poison we'll be dealing with. Also, one tiny caveat, if a perk deck requires either a specific armor type or throwable to function, as we see with Grinder or Hacker, that element will not be randomized, so I can actually get some use out of the likes of dodge or throwable dependent decks. This will make things slightly easier, but also makes for more entertaining gameplay as I get to make use of the perk deck I'm dealt more often than not. All that said, let's get praying to RNGesus and hope for all the luck in Washington. First things first, let's randomize my perk deck using a scale of 1 to 22. Here we've rolled number 12, which is Yakuza. Then the mutator, which will be 1 out of 11 options. Here we've got number 8, which is Hurt Me More, so cloakers will be dealing completely random effects when they go for takedowns. Yakuza is pretty rough, especially without control over skills, but at least the mutator isn't so bad. Next we can roll for character, which is the Mexican Sicario Sangres, and now we randomize the build. The way this seems to work is just by randomly taking and adding skill points constantly until a full build is formed. As a result, it's not always possible to stop the randomizer at exactly 120 points spent, but in those cases I'll allow myself a few points to choose for myself, but no more than 4 maximum. In this case, the build actually looks pretty decent. We have 2 jokers available, loads of skills for fully auto weapons, particularly ARs and SMGs, so I'm legitimately feeling quite confident. Okay, so heading in, the heist is Jewelry Store, which is actually an insanely lucky roll for run 1, but I've not been given a single weapon which makes use of my best skill body expertise, instead being handed the Commando 101 and the Airbow. These are fine, but you can already see where the synergy is going to be an issue, and that things can appear good, but actually be completely useless depending on my luck. Even though this isn't ideal, both weapons are pretty decent in their own right. But you know what isn't? Yakuza. As soon as Death Wish cops start to surround me in this heist, without any armor gating tools, I'm a sitting duck, and soon find myself wasting some of those precious downs. Just a heads up for this entire video, I will be dropping frames at certain points. For whatever reason, one of these mods hates my laptop, which is why I wasn't able to stream this entire run as I originally planned. That aside, pushing through the frame rate issues, the Commando is a massive lifesaver, helping me hold down the back of the store whilst I drill the safe. Once in, I can look to maneuver my way into the escape van, as there's no way I win a war of attrition, bearing in mind my very limited ammo supply and complete lack of healing. Sadly, I've already spawned snipers at this stage, and with Yakuza's really limited options against spike damage, pushing out onto the road is a death sentence. Securing 2 bags before first a flaming cloaker, then a flashbang, puts me in the grave. In hindsight, I think this was absolutely possible if I was more patient or rolled some form of healing instead of the C4 for equipment, but this was still the learning phase of the run, so no sweat. Up next, we were gifted with everyone's favourite deck, Rogue, and told to deal with a clone army of shields. I'm not going to run through every single random element and build in this video as we'd be here all day, but just know this one was pretty rough. The issue being that I had great skills like Partners in Crime Aced, but no way to actually get a convert as I didn't roll the Joker skill. In any case, I headed into day 1 of Big Oil, hoping for some explosives, which sadly I didn't get. Luckily I did roll an ECM in my equipment slot, but was unable to rush the stealth portion of this heist with just the one, so we have a shield army to deal with. Fortunately, even though my KS-12 urban rifle and the AK-10 SMG couldn't dent them, the AI had the ability to pierce those shields, so could virtually carry me. I was almost done drilling when pretty dumb positioning got me down, which created a waterfall effect, leading to a pretty unceremonious end to the heist. This is definitely me overestimating the power of Rogue and underestimating the damage output of shields. Oh well, probably saved me from a similar fate on day 2. After that one, it was time for Grinder, a deck that really holds its own on Deathwish, but the build I was given was much more suited for stealth. In any case, the next heist was the most recently added Mountain Master, which is pretty easy all things considered. I went hoping to commit to stealth, especially seeing as the mutator was giving cops 5 times the health. But at a glance, I assumed my Akimbo Signature 40s had suppressors, but was sorely mistaken, forcing the heist loud because I didn't bother to read. Sadly, even with the powerful CR805B, I just didn't have the damage to deal with the mutator multiplier, particularly against specials who I couldn't just dominate. The throwing knives I was equipped with provided 1 lifeline thanks to their high damage, but after making it up to the penthouse, I was surrounded, alone, and taken out. Sadly, unless I can stealth the heist, because of training is absolutely one of the worst mutator rolls I can end up with. Following on from those initial failures, I was next handed Sicario and sent to the airport for Firestarter. Looking at the build, it's never great to see all those skills invested into sentries when there's no guarantee that will be the equipment I end up with on the heist. Even so, day 1 started off fine. Sicario is a great objective-minded pert deck, and my triple SMG build felt quite powerful even against shield dozers. I drilled and acquired all 8 weapon cases, starting to move them with the aid of my AI over to the fuel tanker. Here is where I decided that this wouldn't be an April Fool's video if I didn't do an entire prank on myself. I downed the fuel tanker not once, not twice, but on 3 separate occasions, going straight into custody the 3rd time around. Sometimes I really am my own worst enemy, but that thing has insane range on it. I was planning to wait out custody, but Houston decided to break the Geneva Convention and execute our last hostage, ending this heist early. Clearly, this challenge was going to be harder than I first assumed. We were at heist 5 without making any real headway. Finally though, I got a top tier pert deck in Kingpin, as well as rolling Hurt Me More, one of the more manageable mutations. The armoured transport underpass heist was ideal as a stepping stone for this challenge, with everything falling into place as I had 14 first aid kits to lean on. Not to mention, the microgun and parabellum pistol are both top tier for what I was running. It was easy to defend the drills and lockpick the security boxes, and then start to secure them in the escape van. One cloaker went full on nuclear, killing both myself and Duke, but he wasn't enough alone to prevent me from achieving my first heist clear over an hour into the challenge. But those good times don't tend to last for long. Next, I rolled a stealth-only Murky Station, with an admittedly fine build, but heists that limit the approach make things even harder for us on this run. I was given the over 9000 saw and signature 40 pistol for this task, but with no silencers in sight and pretty heavy armour, things were far from ideal. In the end, this heist was cut short when this drone cam caught me rubbing my money bundle all over this Murky's face, which is definitely reason enough to call the cops. Sadly, back to square one. The next heist cemented that I hadn't experienced any sort of breakthrough from the fluke on Underpass, as the bomb dockyard proved to be too much of a challenge for my ex-president build to take on. The loadout I was gifted with was pretty sick on the surface, but unfortunately didn't have enough concealment to proc low blow crits. And with my lack of experience with ex-president, I ended up getting absolutely destroyed by spawning snipers, which I didn't have the accuracy or healing to push through. As a result, I decided to call this one early once I ended up in custody the first time. After this, it felt like the game was taking pity on me. My next RNG roll gave me Anarchist, comfortably my best deck, and Jimmy, who is easily my favourite character. I was also spared with a pretty low roll on because of training. If you're wondering how I decide the mutator if it's on a slider, I have another random number generator set up picking between 1 and 100 that dictates how much I have to suffer. Here we got lucky with a low roll of 4. Loading in, I was even granted the Benetti rangefinder, one of my favourite weapons in the game. In fact, everything was set up perfectly, as the heist, White Xmas, is one of the least objective intensive in the game. As a result, I got Vlad's brother-in-law to the chopper relatively easily, the only scare coming from snipers, Anarchist Kryptonite, and the headless dozers who apparently I'd forgotten to turn off. The escape spawned nicely though, and I made it out for yet another completion. This once again had me asking, can we get a streak going? Unlikely though, as it was Bomb Forest next. I'd be dealing with a clone army of medics, and even if medics aren't much of a damaging threat for our hacker setup, getting unlucky with dodge and snipers is of course a recipe for disaster. It took me an age to find the vault, which is always RNG, and the weapons I spawned with were insufficient for dealing with snipers, this heist's greatest threat. As a result, I ended up going down and then straight into custody, as the piss poor AI pathing stopped me from being revived. But in all honesty, it probably saved me from 20 more minutes of pure suffering, which is definitely not foreshadowing for later in this video. As if we hadn't had enough, we were immediately thrust right back into the Bomb Forest, which is pretty low odds 2 heists in a row. This time I'd be dealing with an army of medics alongside dozers. Great. To make matters worse, I'd be doing so with Biker equipped, my least favourite deck in the game. Oh, and I'd still forgotten to take Walking Nightmare off, so the dozers would be headless and therefore virtually unkillable for my build. The javelins were fantastic against the medics, but that alone wasn't enough when an entire army of headless dozers decided to spawn directly behind me. Get me out of this forest. And straight into the slaughterhouse. Once again, I'd roll Biker, this time up against a clone army of cloakers. For once, I was sad I didn't roll the awful Counter-Strike skill. What I did have was a decent damage output with the Akimbo Spec Ops SMGs, but there was just an overwhelming number of cloakers. The eventual plan, after seeing I couldn't keep my AI alive, was to go it alone, as cloakers won't use their takedown if you're the only one alive on the map. But with Biker's pathetic defenses, I couldn't heal enough to keep myself alive even under the incredibly low damage output of Cloaker SMGs. There were simply too many of the spooks, so this run was bust, once again at the first hurdle. At this point, things weren't looking good. After 11 heists, I'd only been successful in 2, and neither of those had been consecutive. Honestly, I was starting to wonder about my own rule set, but it was too late for that. Things were absolutely only going to get worse before they got any better, as up next, the RNG gods decided to send me to the Golden Grin Casino, a slog in both loud and stealth. Starting things off, I forgot to bring the tag team throwable, the deck I was unfortunately given. This can't have helped, but at least I was given the Kknowley and Dragon's Breath Street Sweeper, both brilliant weapons to be granted for a heavy kill heist such as this. Things were going fine, until snipers decided to spawn and shoot me before I could physically react. In fact, this guy was so keen to get me that even after I took him out, he used his last ounce of strength to launch his entire body at me and go in for that martyrdom kill. After that moment of hilarity, things turned into a cycle of me going down, using my few remaining meds, going to custody, and then repeating those steps over and over again thanks to trading hostages. One break in that monotony occurred when I decided to speed up my downfall by shocking both Dallas and Duke to death thanks to the friendly fire mutator, but it was soon after that I decided it wasn't worth coming out of custody just to die all over again. The Fates were not feeling particularly charitable after my lengthy struggles, as they sent me straight into Hoxout next, a pretty lengthy heist to try and get through, whilst all opposing cops have almost 600% of their usual health pool. Sicario was at least a lifeline, as it enabled me to push objectives even without clearing out those tanky enemies. The Jocelyn I'd been given was worthless without shotgun skills, but the Blaster 9mm actually put out respectable DPS at times on this heist. As a result, I was able to push through most roadblocks without really being pinned down. This was until I sadly ran into the SWAT van objective, which is comfortably the worst one to roll on this heist. I was able to get the drilling done with the aid of my smoke screens, but was still down due to a lack of cover. Sadly, my supposed friends and allies decided to just leave me to police custody instead of even trying to go for the revive. Even now, I have no idea why, but sometimes Payday AI just works like that, and they were happy to head all the way back to where we'd initially freed Hawks to trade a cop and secure my release. This left me pushing the van up the final straight alone, which was easy enough using my smoke and the van itself for cover. From there, it was just a case of lowering the bollards, fighting the world's tankiest skulldozer, and making a sadly doomed run to the van. Yet, I found myself back in custody for the second time this heist. But thanks to grabbing a few extra hostages in the car park, I could be freed once again, so long as my boys stayed alive for 2 minutes. At this point, a new cheese strategy was starting to form in my head. The only question was whether I'd have the patience to keep waiting out these tedious timers. At least for now, I would. heading on to the mandatory day 2, at which point all my struggles on day 1 were instantly made irrelevant. The FBI inside the headquarters had received so much training, I was turned into a fine red mist within 2 minutes of the heist. So much for all that hard work. But at least I'd learned something. Little did I know how important this information would soon be. Anyway, back to the drawing board as we rolled a great looking build for survivability, packing shotproof and plenty of revenant skills. However, this one was always going to be scuffed the second I saw we'd be dealing with 4-way hydras. Remember, something was already impacting my laptop's running performance from modding the game. Having cops duplicate themselves 4 times over was definitely going to be the icing on the cake. If only I'd been on my Apex gaming PC instead of my old laptop. Never before has a sponsored plug been so relevant to a video. If you want to be able to run all of the most performance intensive mods and push the engine to its limits, consider a purchase of one of my Payday 2 tailored machines found in the link in the description. Honestly, for the sake of this video, I desperately wish I was recording with one at the time. Back to First World Bank though, and my original idea was to stealth this heist as I was sure hydras would be too much to handle. This was actually going fine until I was spotted. Remember, any slip up meant I had to shoot, which in turn replicated the guard, and suddenly I was dealing with more pages than anyone could possibly handle. Fortunately, as the heist went loud, I'd been granted Anarchist, which is a top tier perk deck, and weapons in the Akimbo Chimanos and Brothers Grimm that could at least deal with the low health hydras. However, as I started to run into elite SWATs and specials, it became clear I'd need more firepower, which actually manifested in the most surprising way. My throwable shurikens were actually insanely good at killing all hydra spawns whilst preventing them from shooting back at me. Essentially stun locking them before their internal logic had worked out that they had an objective to do. This strategy got me into the second half of the heist, pouring on the thermite and then waiting. Now, you may expect this was all about hiding out, but with my laptop already chugging, I decided to take full advantage of one of Payday's greatest design flaws. Basically, AI reaction time is somewhat dependent on the power of the host machine, so what was actually happening was the map was so flooded by newly spawned cops, very few actually had the processing power to work out where I was and shoot at me. As a result, I was able to run around a lot more freely than you'd initially expect. Plus, so long as I kept a few hostages in the bank, I could always rely on being brought back from custody if I did happen to slip up, as almost everyone on the map was a complete lobotomite. So with a combined abuse of game mechanics and processing limitations, I was able to turn what looked like an impossible challenge into one that was surprisingly easy, securing all 8 bags, whilst almost all of the cops on the map were just trying to work out what planet they just spawned in. This was a massively surprising completion, but one we'll absolutely take. Looking to keep the streak going, I headed straight into the next heist. Watchdogs, packing skills like surefire and body expertise. The Maniac perk deck I rolled with was not ideal, but on Death Wish it's not actually as terrible as you'd expect. Not to mention, Friendly Fire is one of the easiest mutators to deal with. On day 1, I rolled the Igor automatic pistol and R700 sniper. Whilst I had few skills to augment them, they were a perfectly complementary duo for dealing with threats at all ranges. The AI were also hugely helpful on this heist, carrying the extra bags of coke I needed over to the loot van before we escaped, despite me lying prostrate by the time the armoured truck arrived. Day 2 was far less simple, or at least I was doing everything in my power to apparently sabotage myself. The science locomotive I was handed was pretty dreadful in my defense, but I did manage to single-handedly destroy all 3 of my friendly AI with a shock grenade, not once, but twice at the start of this heist, having to call on my ECM feedback to salvage the situation. Once I brought the bags over to the dock though, things got a lot easier. My Akimbo Parabellums really packed a punch, helping me to make a clean escape in 7 minutes. This was huge. I was now just one heist away from completing yet another challenge and not ending up the fool on April the 1st. But things are seldom that simple on this challenge. The heist was Hotline Miami, and the randomization honestly looked decent. Hitman is weak, but playable, and we already know that Overdosed is fine. This was certainly possible. Going in and rushing those early objectives, I was given a triple pistol build, but importantly, the secondary was the 5.7, meaning I had armor piercing against those shield dozers. In my haste, I managed to blow myself up once again on the way out of the lab, which, looking back, could have been a fatally wasted down. With snipers being such an issue on this heist too, I was struggling with my weapons damage drop off and wasting resources early. But once I was done with the outdoor objectives, I had the DPS to easily hold down a room and even go ammo positive thanks to melee skills and the motherforker. As buggy as the shield dozers were, they weren't hugely disruptive on this heist, meaning I made it into the basement eventually. And at this point though, never before have I seen so many cops follow me down here immediately. This landslide was too much for my crappy hitman setup to repel, and I was quickly sent to custody. No worries though, I had hostages and was freed 2 minutes later. With this, I finally had access to the commissar's stash and could work out his location, which is usually where day one gets a little easier. But the cops this time around were absolutely tenacious, and I slipped up without bullseye to gate, going down to grey while searching for the correct address. Now here's where I have some contention. I waited out the assault and went to make my escape safely, while still having 2 hostages down in the basement. If I went down again, I'd be almost immediately traded between waves. Yet in the very second I made my first sprint over to the DeLorean, catching a bullet for my trouble, both decided to instantly disappear, leaving me in custody without a friend in the world. This was pretty heartbreaking. With the right weapons and more hostage cheese strats, I'm almost positive I could have completed Hotline Miami Day 2 and cleared the challenge. But lucky for you guys, I'm the one getting cheesed by the game, and so we forge on. At this point, I decide to update the squad's arsenal, handing them all Mosconis and making them true random, as is the theme of this run after all. I'm also going to have to go a little faster in these heist recaps if I'm going to make the April 1st deadline. Heist 16 was one of the best setups for a heist I've had going in. The build had loads of utility and survivability with drill skills and Messiah, the Mutator extraterrestrial heisters has no real drawback, and we even rolled great weapons when in the heist. However, Biker keeps cropping up, and that is what's really hurting me. Transport Crossroads is also not as easy as I hoped it would be. The sniper spawns are a massive pain for us here, one-shotting once I've been down once already. This results in me getting caught out on the wrong side of the map whilst unloading the loot and getting clipped on my way back to the meds whilst grey, ending one of the most promising runs we'd had so far. Another White Xmas next, and my hope after rolling Sociopath was that weapon RNG wouldn't really matter as I could lean on melee for this difficulty. Sadly, I got one of the worst melee weapons I could in the telescopic baton, and was cursed by light armor, which doesn't pair well with Sociopath. Not to mention, I had a dead weapon in the form of the saw, and my AK was, well, completely hideous. As a result, I wasted the opportunity of this easy heist, and it was clear I was pretty tilted. At this point, I clearly needed something to slow me down, and the perfect opportunity presented itself in the form of Murky Station, a stealth-only heist. Except, I was given the gift of 75 detection risk thanks to this chunky Tatonka. But even so, it was at least silenced, meaning I could give this a go. If Mortifier can do it, then why can't I? Don't answer that, it's rhetorical. On this run, after cleaning up a duo behind the trains, I started seeking the EMP, getting millimeters away from detection by both drone cams and passing guards, yet somehow managed to open all 4 carriages, locate the bombs and stumble across the thermite, then later the hard drive which I'd need to access the final part, dragging both over to the water to secure them at a snail's pace. This may genuinely be one of my first ever 75 detection stealth runs without any ECMs. Hell, I didn't even have any stealth skills to speak of. Pretty proud of this completion, it was just what my bruised ego needed. But I'm not allowed to be happy in this run, as I was immediately brought down to earth by my mutator roll giving me alternate arsenal at over 800%. This means all cops will be dealing over 8 times the damage that they'd usually deal, making almost anything but stealth impossible with the grinder deck had also been generated. Fortunately, Big Oil was approachable in stealth, but it's definitely not the easiest. On day 1, I went for a tentative approach, using my suppressed car 4 to clear the garage and start drilling. If the address was here, I'd be golden. Or so I assumed. You see, the bikers move around outside a lot more than I realised, and eventually I was forced to make a desperate attempt to stop the heist going loud, which I failed in. But seemingly, I'd bought enough time as the address was contained in that first safe, meaning escape was available almost as soon as the cops showed up. As I guessed, I was completely decimated in 2 shots, but that was enough to force my way out of the biker compound after a few necessary downs. Which moves us on to day 2. stealth was pretty much off the cards after the game decided to hand me a massive Platypus 70 sniper out of the gate. I was able to drill open the first door just by killing guards and answering their pages if they got close, but eventually I ran out of pages and all hell broke loose. In the close quarters confines of the mansion, it was actually possible for me to play safely and avoid damage for the most part, with my sniper dishing out more than enough in the opposite direction. But once the hack started and the cops were able to pull me out from my hiding spot, things became much more difficult, having one brief stint in custody before going down for the last time as I desperately searched for a medic bag. And with that, all my hard work at the train yard had evaporated. But that's the way of it when you play Painday 2, and I wasn't giving up just yet. Back to the quickfire heist, Beneath the Mountain went far better than it had any right to, using a lightweight ballistic vest Kruk build. My Akimbo MP40s did some serious work, pushing me through the airlock section before I was hurled up at the consoles. Here I did have one immensely lucky dodge rush to rescue my stolen loot before heading to the surface. Sadly, this would be where my luck ran out, as I was sniped right at the end of the heist rushing to reach a medic bag. Once again, snipers had proven to be my foil, and this one was extra crushing, bearing in mind how close I was to completing a really difficult heist with a far from ideal build. Clearly, having a manageable mutator was absolutely key to completing a heist, but looking at it now, I only really had 3 out of 11 chance of rolling one that was genuinely not problematic in some serious way, potentially explaining why we're 21 heists deep and still no closer to completing 3 in a row. Our second trip to the slaughterhouse came next, and this time the crew wasn't being descended upon by an endless army of cloakers. However, Stoic, which is usually a godsend, was actually a massive curse here. First, there was no guarantee I'd get heavy enough armour to make good use of it, and I was already lacking some important skills like Iron Man. My randomly generated weapons were fine, but I didn't have any form of healing within the build, which is devastating for Stoic users. This meant that my health was effectively a limited resource that was constantly being worn down even by small amounts of chip damage. Once a cloaker managed to successfully sneak attack, I was completely exposed, and with the medic bag spawning much further along on this heist, it was only a matter of time before even the mighty Stoic was torn apart. Definitely a disappointing performance from what is still probably the best perk deck in the game. For the next heist, the Diamond, I was actually given a fairly competent stealth deck in Burglar. My weapons and build actually facilitated a surprisingly high concealment stat too, meaning stealth started off promisingly. That was until I decided to take out the cameras, completely forgetting that several more camera operators would spawn out of his fresh corpse once I did so due to the Hydra's mutator. Incredibly idiotic on my end, but this wasn't an immediate failure. 2 split Hydras are much easier to handle than 4, and I already knew that I could rely on my laptop's inability to process if it really came down to it. As such, I held off reasonably successfully, the Valkyria rifle actually putting in work and being insanely satisfying to use. Getting into the Diamond exhibit was a bit of a struggle, but I actually managed to memorize a fairly simple pattern and get to the Diamond without putting it into lockdown. Unfortunately, on my way out, I found myself in a truly dire strait, especially after accidentally releasing the poison gas into the chamber. In a moment of accidental brilliance that surprised even myself, I pressed the F key to start converting a cop a millisecond before entering police custody. Fortunately, just having their hands up counts as being converted for the sake of AI trading, and as the assault wave had just come to an end, the crew were able to bring me back a few seconds later in one of the most clutch outcomes I could imagine. Not wanting to waste the opportunity I'd been given, I hid out until the escape chopper spawned and left with the Diamond immediately as soon as it did. Definitely more luck than skill on display here, but that's what it's all about. Time now to take the chance I was given. Finally, I had a non-impactful mutator and a decent looking build on deck heading into the Black Cat. Rolling the Akimbo Brothers Grim here was also huge, especially with Akimbo skills on deck. I decided I'd try to stealth as much of this heist as possible and go for the non-C4 approach, starting by grabbing this keycard and tying down a sieve that somehow remained undetected for the entire heist. I'm pretty sure I was rocking 75 detection, at least it seemed like cameras were spotting me instantly, but I was able to make it to Lee Dang safe without being detected. It was during the drilling process here that I remembered security on the boat can actually enter this massage room, panicking and blasting guard number 1 straight into the roof. At first, I had no idea what had happened, until I remembered that extraterrestrial heisters, the mutator which I'd set to the mothership setting, was causing my shotguns to launch everything they killed skyward. After answering one pager from the roof, I finally got the code before launching this guy's mate straight into the same spot 30 seconds later. Somehow I snuck back over to the opposite end and found Junkang's suite, but by this point the floating guards in the massage parlour had been discovered. I can only imagine what that guy paged in to the operator. Of course, this moved the heist to loud, which was honestly fine by me. I had plenty of meds, getting quite lucky with skill and equipment synergy, and I also had a monstrous pair of shotguns in the form of the Goliaths, which still hold up after the nerfs. Launching cops into the sky is also seriously satisfying. Great to see I finally got some use out of one of the most hilarious mutators in the game. After breaking into the vault and unloading the loot, it was just a case of calling the chopper in, sending a few bodies into outer space from the front deck, and making my great escape on what was an incredibly successful and genuinely enjoyable heist, possibly a first within this challenge. Once again, I was one heist completion away from my goal. Lady Luck was the only thing standing in my way. However, it doesn't take much to tip the scales against me. While she can giveth in the form of anarchist, she can also taketh away. Clone Army Bulldozer is about as difficult as it gets, making stealth a virtual necessity for whatever heist I roll. Sadly, the biker heist does not give me such an option. Not only is it multi-day, extending my suffering, it is also an incredibly difficult heist with sniper coverage, rough RNG objectives, and a 100% chance to spawn a SWAT van turret. In other words, this was hell even without every regular enemy being switched to a bulldozer. It didn't matter what build or perk deck I had, Dragon and the boys lasted just over 2 minutes before throwing in the towel. Once again, back to square one after a mountain of hard work and suffering. April 1st was also closing in on me. Deadlines are always my greatest enemy. Of course, we weren't finished just yet. There was still precious hours left in the day, but to rub salt into the wound, Destiny gave me because of training once again. This time, cops having a record 939% increased health pool. Now, Brooklyn Bank is pretty easy, but when you literally don't have the damage to kill a sniper with your 44 revolver, you know you're in trouble. With this rule set, cops are basically an obstacle to be avoided, which is all well and good when you're moving around for objectives, but once every cop on the map decides to congregate in the foyer, you're in trouble. I could have probably played this a little more patiently, but getting to die side by side with my main man Jimmy is a better way to go than any alternative. Rather die on my feet than live on my knees and all that. After this, the reprieve still wouldn't come. Ironically, I was given Walking Nightmares, one of the more easy to play around mutations, but on Safe House Nightmare, literally the main heist that throws headless dozers at you. Sadly, Safe House Nightmare is a gimmick heist that really requires you to have access to specific weaponry. Despite rolling a decent muscle build, and being given the Commando rocket launcher, one of the few decent weapons against the headless dozers, Bonnie was still doomed to fail again from the start. I was just relieved I didn't roll this heist when on a streak. Speaking of which, I was now desperate to go on one. I was starting to wonder if those key mistakes on Hotline Miami would be the nail in the coffin for this run. But I didn't give up hope, and my faith was rewarded by another armoured transport underpass, one of the heists I already knew to be completable. Armourer is a good perk deck, I even had Bullseye to support it, and my mutator didn't affect anything negatively. The weapons I rolled weren't great, but I've actually gained quite a bit of respect for this strangely modified Cobra SMG. Honestly, I've never seen half the weapons look like this because I feel like I always modify for concealment, but you can really create some crazy looking guns in Payday 2. In any case, this wasn't a walk in the park, and I did actually find myself sent to custody at one point, but my hostage technique was still as effective as ever, and so I made it out with 5 bags of gold after 12 minutes. Back now to Maniac, a perk deck that had actually served me surprisingly well earlier in the run. The build was also not too shabby, so I was set up on Sokol for a pretty successful heist no matter what we rolled. Little did I know at this point, I was about to know the true meaning of Painday. The heist was Bomb Forest, apparently a staple for this challenge. If I could surmount this hurdle, I'd absolutely have earned a chance at 3 in a row. My weapons for this were a strange single-fire Colbus 90 and an extremely low accuracy pair of Strike 18Cs, not ideal for a notoriously long-ranged heist. I'd roll creeps in my mutator, which I thought would actually help me out, and at times it did. But equally, with my weapons being predominantly close range, it was almost impossible for me to take out enemies without also catching myself in the blast. This resulted in a plethora of downs and saw me going through my medic bag supplies extremely quickly. Snipers were a virtually unassailable target too, unless my AI decided to start potshotting with their shotguns. As a result, I felt like I was made of paper no matter where I was on the map. Even after I started the pump, it was almost impossible to find suitable cover from all angles, so again and again I'd be overrun, often blown up by my own attempts at self-defense. However, I had one secret advantage. Because the map is so massive, the cops tend to spread out. If I could hold hostages across it, it was very likely that I'd always be able to return from custody, assuming I had the patience. Sadly, this became a massive crutch in this heist, as I was struggling to stay alive for more than 10 seconds at a time. This left me with 2-minute periods where I just had to hope that my hostages wouldn't end up as collateral damage from those creeps' explosions. Eventually, after over 20 minutes of this back and forth, I'd filled the wagon and was able to blast it open. But here is where my suffering only got more intense. As I attempted to carry the 4 bomb parts down the hill to the chopper escape, with my AI as mules, I was sent to custody yet again. Fine, I could still be brought back, but some of the bags were now in the police's hands and being brought down the hill to the road. It was at this point I realised I should have gone for one of the other 2 escapes. As I didn't, the ensuing 10 plus minutes of gameplay may be the most upsetting Payday footage you will have ever seen, as I scrambled to make sure I had hostages, only to be sent right back to the slammer over and over again. Eventually I was able to drop 1 part into the escape, thanks to sheer force of will and a merciful lack of snipers. This left me with just 3 more to go, and once I again returned from custody for the 5th time in this run, I was fortunately reunited with my crew at the base of the forest and able to more conservatively make my way up to the escape, and somehow make it out after a grand total of 37 minutes of pain. Over those 37 minutes, I went down a total of 33 times, almost once a minute, which has to be some sort of record. Whilst I have to admit, completing this heist was bittersweet, as I'd shown very little game sense and skill in doing so, I had at the very least proven I was resolved in completing this challenge, whatever the cost to my sanity. So I headed back to the main menu and rolled the dice once again, hopefully for the last time. My reward was Hacker, Clone Army Medic, and a fairly decent build thanks to acquiring Unseen Strike, which could give me a crit option against those pesky reviving medics. The heister was Jiro, giving him a chance to redeem himself for Hotline Miami, and the heist, my arch nemesis which had plagued me since the first ever challenge run, Panic Room. Heading into the building, I was cursed with an incredibly weak Bonetti pistol, but then blessed by a pretty monstrous microgun, the ideal weapon to seal the deal on Panic Room. It took me an embarrassingly long time to find Chavez, as I had no idea he could spawn in this room, but eventually I got to sawing the Panic Room free. This part of the heist is easy enough. Of course, after a while the wave of medics will clog up all the hallways, but they don't present the same damage threat as something like the Dozer army. Having access to Hacker gave me a method to sprint past the medics and generally keep objectives moving along without having to enter into real gunfights. Once I was on the rooftop, the dreaded snipers presented a lot less of a challenge than they have in the past, being able to pick them off with both my pistol and, surprisingly, the accurate minigun. As the roof filled up with a virtually immortal army of medics, it was actually possible to confuse their AI by running from entrance to entrance and even occasionally all the way downstairs to force them to move, respawn, and be generally less effective than if I just tried to gun them all down. This enabled me to take out the last sniper after 16 minutes. I'd wasted a lot of resources over that period, but I was saved by a strange Payday 2 mechanic. You see, the medics only replace standard spawns on this heist. Static spawns of beat cops and elite heavy SWATs will still occur as usual, meaning I had an endless supply of hostage fodder to keep from going into custody for long. Placing the C4 was understandably difficult due to the population of medics in the building, but somehow, likely due to some incredibly good chain dodge luck, I was able to plant all 9 explosives and blast the top 3 floors. Notice, despite being grey screen here, I'm not that worried about going into custody, as I'll instantly respawn outside of the assault period. If it wasn't for this loophole in Payday 2's solo mechanics, I genuinely don't believe I would have been able to come close to completing this challenge, at least not on Death Wish. Eventually, I did go into custody, but it didn't matter, the damage was done, and this was just an opportunity to wait out half of the assault. At which point I headed to the roof, secured the magnet, and defended Bile's escape with my shoulder-mounted monster of a weapon. My escape was all that remained, leaping over the railings before decimating the gangsters in the cellar in a satisfying and triumphant blaze of glory. Finally, I had completed 3 completely random Payday 2 heists in a row. Let me tell you, more than any other run I've attempted, the relief from this one was immense. Something about the lack of control I had on the outcome of certain heists was just so frustrating, and I think it was kind of interesting that this challenge was completable, but only with the right pinch of luck and access to some of the most degenerate strategies we've had to lean on so far. Overall though, I actually think this challenge is the most interesting and inventive I've attempted in this series. I love that I had a chance to play with weapons and perk decks I absolutely never would otherwise. I think if you were to try this at home, I recommend you have some control over skill builds, as those were frustratingly random, but the other elements can be a ton of fun to work around. I think I had the chance to play with most of the perk decks in the game over the 30 heists it took to get this done, which is cool in itself. Oh, and mutators are pretty busted. Maybe go a little easy on those if you decide to give this a try. If you just want to bring a little more variety and randomness into your gameplay, I strongly recommend you give at least some of these mods a chance. Check them out in the description, and of course give your appreciation to the talented mod creators who make videos such as these possible. I'm hoping that this year's April Fools was more to your liking than the last. I'm also hoping that Overkill have handed over that musket at long last today, and will of course be bringing you a video covering whatever Payday content likely came out on April the 1st very shortly. Stay tuned, I'll see you all very soon. As ever, thank you very much to my Mean Infamy patrons and above. If you want to join that infamous club to see yourself in the credits or get early exclusive access to my videos, including the story videos, check out my Patreon link below. Remember, the Discord is open to all if you crave some more Payday discussion. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you all very soon for the next one.